Psychology in Seattle.
So, Bob.
Yes.
Welcome to a video episode.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening on your iPhones or whatever, you won't be seeing the video, but if you want to, you can go to YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, then you see this. As usual, Bob, I have a lot of things I want to talk with you about, not any particular one thing.
How much of my t-shirt can you see?
How much can the t-shirt? You see Seabrook, that's all you see.
Oh, okay.
And then the top of the USA.
I've been coming here for a year, and I always wear a nice shirt, and, here we are.
And then today, I sprung the video on you.
Well, yeah.
So this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Bob?
I am also a therapist here in town in Seattle with nearby you and your friend from graduate school from way back when.
Is it freaky to be on video?
I probably look a little self-conscious, don't I?
Well, I don't know. Does it freak you out a little bit?
No, I feel like it's just the same old you and me. We just kind of talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this email is specifically to you and me, Bob, from an anonymous patron.
Okay.
Hello, Kirk and Bob. On a recent episode, actually, no, I want to talk with you about something first.
Sure.
Because I'm sure a lot of people want to know, is our last episode, you went into, detail of your own vulnerability and your own thoughts and feelings around your own attachment issues.
Yeah.
How you've had a lot of feelings over the years about your therapist and whether or not he likes you or not.
Yes.
And you talked a lot about your own marriage and your path from trauma. And we got a lot of emails about it. And I just wanted to debrief with you. How did it feel? How does it feel to look back on it? How did it feel to do it?
Some of the emails moved me to tears. It was really lovely to read those things and to think that I were having a decent impact, or our conversation had a good impact on people. Made me feel proud. I think after that talk we had that day, I remember when I was leaving here remarking to you that I felt like genuineness was like a strong value of mine. So I feel good about it. And I listened to it yesterday actually, and I thought I was a little talking about disorganized. I thought I was a little disorganized in talking about it. I really appreciated the ways in which you kept us on track and kept us focused. And actually, Colleen and I listened to it together. She said the same thing. She's like, Kirk is really good at keeping this going and organized, and you're very kind to me. And I feel good about that episode, and I feel good about so what I read of the impact we had on peeps out there. So that's good.
Yeah. People said they cried along with you. Mm-hmm. They said that your feelings exactly represented their own feelings towards their therapists, towards their spouses, and how no one had ever articulated it in the way that you had, especially from such a visceral level, and how for some people the episode was life-changing.
It's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that.
Yeah. You weren't disorganized at all in terms of the path you took. I thought it was extremely organized.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think there were times when you went down some tangents. Tangents isn't the right word. You started going down a path to further the conversation, and you got a little lost a couple times. But true. Aside from that, I think it's just a common thing that when we listen back to ourselves, there's always some kind of what am I doing? Yeah. And one of the things that people often criticize themselves is for not being on track enough. And I would not characterize that in that way at all.
Okay.
How does it feel to read all those, those messages? I mean, have you felt that you were alone in this, or is it just I know all you people are out there, or I don't know.
Oh, that's a good question. I found them really moving and touching. Do I feel like I'm alone? Maybe I do. Maybe I'm as alone as any of those folks who wrote in. I don't know how to answer that. I mostly felt really moved. I remember feeling really excited and pleased. I mean, there were somewhere between 6 and 10 on Friday. Is that when you published it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 6 and 10 you forwarded to me on Friday, and it made my day. That was a really good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been interesting because, and I've said this before to you, but I don't know if on the podcast, when I started this podcast 11 years ago, I wanted it to be you and me.
Yeah.
And I asked you,
Yeah.
and you were like, nah, not for me. And at the time, I don't know, I thought it was because you thought, that sounds kind of dumb. But later you told me it was because you thought you didn't have anything to offer.
I remember that.
Yeah. And which was fine. Plus it was like kind of a pipe dream at the time. It's like, who wants to, I've had a lot of pipe dreams in my life. And
yeah, but that's cool.
Yeah, but it could have been bad, and it was bad at the beginning.
Oh.
I just persisted and figured it out as we went. Maybe it's still bad. I don't know, but
I don't think so.
But you have been on the podcast very rarely throughout the years until recently.
Yeah.
The past year or two, and you started to come on and
It's 2 years.
make it more regular.
Yeah, right.
And you've become more comfortable.
Yeah.
And the path of us and you with the listeners toward that episode is interesting to think about.
Yeah.
And how the listeners would often say, "Oh, Bob's my favorite." They'd say, "No offense, Umberto, but I love it when Bob's on the podcast." And how one could just track those episodes towards that place, and how where are we going to go next? Where is this thing going? It's interesting to think about. I remember thinking about this at the time or afterwards, because I listened back to it, when it posted. And I remember thinking this as I was listening, that, they used to have this thing, or they still do, I suppose, but it's not very prevalent, is peer therapy, peer counseling.
Oh, right.
Did you ever do that?
No, never did it, but I'm familiar.
Where two therapists therapize each other, and you each take a turn, is the usual format.
Sometimes it's non-therapists that take a little bit of training in basic listening skills, reflective listening, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
And the therapists, they don't charge each other, or they cancels each other out or something. But each person spends an hour being the therapist, or half hour, whatever. And that always appealed to me. I always thought, like, that would be pretty great, because you would depend on each other. You would, and it's not like a friendship, because it's a little bit more formal, right? It's more formal in terms of the unidirectionality of the healing or something. And I started thinking, like, our podcasts are turning into that a little bit. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's me. What do you think about that?
I like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm up for that.
Yeah. So, it's already happening, I think.
Well, yeah, I was just saying, I'm up to keep going.
If it's too late, whether you're up for it or not, it's happening. But yeah, I mean, because I'm just trying to think, because there's so many people out there, perhaps everyone on some level is suffering in a way where they feel alone, they feel worthless, they feel scared, they feel afraid, they feel distant, they feel rejected, they feel scared of rejection, they feel concerned of rejection. And there's various different coping mechanisms for that, some of which are more dysfunctional than others. And for you to lay it all out and talk about the realness of it, and to talk about how you deal with it, and to talk about the journey and the struggle, and to talk about the other side of healing and therapy and the work. And it's not all fun and games. You're still triggered. There's still times, and yet you're not busted up about it. You're just like, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to get triggered again, and I'm going to make cognitive mistakes and behavioral mistakes. But I'm much better than I was before, And me and my wife have figured out a way to talk to each other through those moments and recover from those moments. And that's reality.
Yeah.
Because so many people email me about like, how do I get over it? And how do I deal with it? And I'll say some version of what you laid out. I'll describe it, but I don't think it resonates as much than you actually describing for yourself the full round of, the full range of experiences and the visceral nature of it all. And I'm just trying to think of another location in the internet that provides such a thing. I'm sure there are other podcasts that are doing something similar, but I don't know. I don't know of them.
The only thing I can think of is, remember those Carl Rogers films from the 60s, I think?
Yeah.
Where they had sessions with, the various dudes.
Right, which is a far cry, because the listeners, by the time you had that episode that you were on last, had bonded with you. They know you.
Yeah.
They know me.
Yeah.
And there's a intimacy there that is prepackaged. And so it's just an amazing thing. As I talk about it, I just think that it's an amazing document that, if anything lasts after I'm dead, like that would be the one thing maybe,
Wow.
this example of humanness and care and self-compassion and maturity and reality around struggle emotionally. It's just a beautiful thing.
You and me get to do that.
Yeah.
We get to do that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thank you on behalf of the listeners.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Good.
I'm surprised. I like coming and talking with you in this way,
Yeah.
At first I thought, okay, I'll do it because we're friends and, I want to support you and you're important to me, right?
Uh-huh.
And now I'm like, I like coming.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah, I like coming.
Oh,
I
cool.
look forward to it. It's part of my week, and I get so much out of listening to you. You're so articulate. You're so thoughtful about it all. You're very compassionate, and I feel like I know you in a whole new and deeper way. And I love watching football with you, and Penn State
joking around
did beat UW last time they played, and
we'll see.
That's fun.
We'll see. We have a brand new.
Right.
Well, we have two rookie quarterbacks that, or not. I don't know if they're rookies, but do you have your returning quarterback?
No, I graduated.
Yeah, so we're both starting over. Do you have your returning running back?
He's playing for the Giants.
Yeah, so we both have. Barkley was Penn State.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Well,
right?
I always have Sandusky, right? So, I'll always pull that one out. All right, so let's go on to anonymous patron here.
Sure.
Hello, Kirk and Bob. On a recent episode, you discussed briefly the topic of indecision. I had a question about a statement that was made regarding being indecisive when depressed. I am now on year 3 of my husband's 3rd lifetime episode, and I have researched, read, listened to podcasts, and even spoke to some psychotherapist over the years, and just want to understand as much as I can about depression for my husband. You mentioned that when on the depression spectrum, especially severe clinical depression, it is very hard to make decisions. Quoting me here, they move in such a slow state that they really don't know what they want. Apparently I said something like that, which is how I think. So when people are depressed, it's just like their brain is moving at such a slow pace in terms of the sequence of this is what I want, this is not what I need to do, these are the steps, okay, get up. There's things are moving at such a slow pace that things interrupt the desire process, so to speak, and they're just like, well, I'm coming up blank. I would rather just not think about it or something.
Do you think that's diminished executive functioning, or is that just distracted?
I think it's to some extent diminished executive functioning, because think about all of us out there, you and me included, when we are tired, it's late at night and you're tired and you just want to go to bed, and you're not depressed, but your brain isn't operating at all on all 6 cylinders. and you're faced with an important decision. Well, I don't know about you, but for me, I can't do it.
Right.
I just go,
Right.
I'm just going to go back to Netflix
Right.
because that's all my brain can handle right now.
Right.
And it's weird because midday, boom, I'm on it. But just before, last maybe hour or two before I go to bed, and
Right.
I'm like, I can't imagine trying to figure that out right now. And so imagine being really depressed all the time. You're just like, and so anyway, I agree and understand that this is so, but cannot understand why or what you meant by that. My husband has made great strides from 2018, and new medication has made a miraculous improvement, but he still has all the underlying symptoms, including not being able to make personal decisions. If one is able to work and make important decisions at work, why not on a personal level? Is it just that they do not have the capacity? What do you think, Bob?
Maybe there's a roteness to the tasks at work. Certain behaviors are expected and so overlearned, and they're easier to make. Maybe there's a different emotional charge.
Right.
So I imagine that's going to, have an impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the anonymous patron isn't saying what they're upset about regarding their husband's indecision.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect it probably has things to do with should we buy a house or not, or should we go on a vacation, or even what movie do you want to watch tonight or something.
Right.
Yeah. So as you say, certain roteness or certain ease of making decisions at work, your practice at it, there's only a certain amount of options or something.
Right.
And so maybe that's a part of it. And then at home, the decisions are potentially much more emotionally laden,
Right.
Emotionally consequential.
Nicely put.
And so you could be more overwhelmed. Another thing is that because basically what she's saying is that he used to be very depressed, but now he's much less depressed, and yet he still has this underlying symptom of indecision. Mm-hmm. It's possible that while he was depressed, he became habitually indecisive, and that's retained after being, quote unquote, less symptomatic.
Oh, curious.
Just habit of, so again, I don't know if this is true for your husband, but imagine for 5 years, every time you're faced with an important decision at home, you put a little bit of energy into it and it doesn't go well, and you get yelled at, or you feel disappointing to other people. Mm-hmm. You feel criticized, like the whole thing just gets wrapped up in a whole, shit present that you're given. And it's just like, this is when I'm faced with making a decision, things go bad. So then year 3 of the depressive episode, you're like faced with a decision. You're like, look, I know if I even give off the impression that I'm available to make a decision, things are going to go badly. And maybe this is even kind of subconscious for the person. Mm. So they're just like, decisions and me don't mix. Well, you learn that lesson, just like you learn various other lessons, like how to ride a bicycle or something. And then you're no longer depressed. And then boom, you're faced with that decision, and you just have this automatic habitual reaction of saying, don't ask me. Even if I begin the process of trying to parse this out.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I find a lot of people are depressed for good reasons. They're depressed for mistreatment reasons, being mistreated by parents or siblings or past spouses, past partners, current partners, society. And that can lead to a certain amount of demoralization in general, mm-hmm. and a certain amount of lack of self and a devaluation of the self. And so even though he isn't depressed in terms of he can get out of bed, he doesn't sleep all day, his appetite is more regulated, he still believes deep down that he's not worth anything, or hasn't really connected with who he is. The main thing with indecision is like, when we're when we're often dealing with indecision problems, we're dealing with, we're either yelling at ourselves, like, how come I'm so indecisive? Or we're yelling at someone, why are you so indecisive? The implication is that if I just yell at you to be decisive, you'll be decisive. But the thing is that when things are working well, you don't have to encourage someone to be decisive. Why? Because they're connected with their needs and their wants to such an extent that their decisions just spew out of them. Like, I'm not indecisive because I'm pretty close to who I am and how I feel.
Right.
And when I have a need, when I have a want, it just spouts out of me. I don't have to try to make a decision. When my wife asked me, she asked me last night, she was making eggs, and she said, she's like, do you want an omelet or do you want a scramble? And I was like, I like both. So honestly, and I was like, and I was kind of thinking about her because I was thinking, well, whichever's easier for you. I feel bad that you're making the eggs to begin with. So I just said something, well, whatever's easiest for you, whatever you think is best. Because I'm pretty ambivalent about it. And then she kind of gave me this face like, oh, well, that doesn't really help me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know, omelet, because I don't know, if I had a slight preference, I guess omelets.
I'd have gone scramble.
Oh, really? I feel like omelets, they're a little bit more meaty, they're a little bit more, like you're eating like a patty instead of just like a air fluff. Anyway, I certainly love, I just like a 51% deal.
Yeah.
So I said to her, well, maybe an omelet because, I like it a little better. And she goes, oh, you had to pick the hard one.
Oh, it's a setup. Choose right. You didn't choose right.
Yeah. And she made the omelet. It was great. But
cool.
The point is that I immediately know what I want. I'm very clear.
Right.
And it's not because I've made a choice to be decisive. It's because I was given a life and have a life that allows me to have the luxury of knowing who I am and what I want. And so it's possible that your husband, anonymous patron, is still developing that he's still. So if you want to focus on something, I wouldn't necessarily focus on the depression because that absolutely can affect indecisiveness, but I might also start focusing on who is he and what is he and how does he feel? Because it might take him a long time to develop a connection to that. And that takes time.
Might catch him being good too. Like, I don't mean being good like he's a good guy or a good person, but like when he's decisive, you might reinforce it or highlight it.
Yeah.
Or
even just what he wants. Like just being like, how do you feel? And he's like, I don't know. I feel pretty good. And so you can reward that. Like, oh, great. Thanks. Thanks for telling me. I'm glad to know what your insides are happening.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Hey, I feel like stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. Oh, okay. You're actually saying what you want.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I thought you literally meant that because it's getting a little hot.
It's stuffy. No, I'm good. Hey, while you were talking, I was
actually, I can't open the door right next to you.
Well,
but continue.
I was remembering that. You remember that Seligman research from the early 70s at UPenn where he had the dogs in the cages and he was shocking them? Do you remember this one?
No.
So he had two conditions of dog. This is an awful experiment. And by the way, Martin Seligman is one of the positive psychology guys, ironically enough. So he did this experiment where dogs in metal cages, and there were two conditions, both of which are being shocked, but one dog had to exit and the other one didn't. So the ones that had to exit, as you can imagine, exited. They got away.
Yeah.
And the ones that didn't, what they did is they wandered around in the cage. They sort of in circles around the cage and then whimpering, and then they laid down and still whimpering, and eventually, and they're still getting shocked the whole time, eventually they just stopped. They just laid there and didn't move and getting shocked and not doing anything. And then here's the kicker. The kicker is he presented them an exit and they didn't take it.
Wow.
And he coined the phrase learned helplessness.
Oh, right.
With the idea that the helplessness is learned. And so maybe anonymous patron's spouse, his brain's just stuck for now.
Yeah.
And I think with practice, I think about those poor dogs. I imagine there's some kind of impression that's made on their brains. It's probably somewhat indelible, but all dogs can be taught to get up and move, to learn how to, anyways. And they also look depressed, by the way.
Yeah, that's a powerful example of what. So we often look at someone like that. So if the dog were to be released and were to be in a happy home,
Right.
and it just sat there on the ground,
Right.
one might say, "Oh man, that dog's really depressed." Well, let's give the dog Lexapro or whatever, some medication and fix the dog's depression. Well, you give the dog a mood enhancer, and the dog, it's a little better. It gets up, walks around, but it still learned a very horrible lesson that needs to be corrected for and unlearned. And so, anyway.
Interesting.
Anonymous patron, she says, "I'm just writing in to pick your brain about academic burnout. A couple years ago, my academic burnout led to stress-induced psychosis.
Oh, wow.
I thought I was in love with my lecturer and thought we were communicating telepathically.
Oh, wow.
I thought other lecturers were evil. I read books by letting the wind decide which page to turn to, and the list goes on in terms of my psychosis. While I can laugh about the aspects of it now, glad about that.
Yeah.
At the time, it was terrifying and led to a suicide attempt at the end of the psychotic period. I'm not sure about psychosis being common in regards to academic burnout or just burnout in general, but I do know that a lot of students are feeling the same strain that led me to the break. As a teacher yourself, have you noticed any patterns with students burning out? What can individuals and institutions do to decrease the toll on students' well-being? And do you find that a particular type of student is more prone to burning out? So, Bob, what do you think? Have you noticed patterns of students burning out?
I don't have a lot of students, so no. I mean,
you
I don't
were
have any
a student.
students. I was, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have anything to say about that. You have probably a lot to say about that. You've had hundreds of students.
I have a lot to say about a lot of things. Burnout's a big problem.
Yeah.
I monitor all my supervisees, and well, now this door open, we're getting a lot of. That's a seaplane, probably.
Yeah.
So in Seattle, we have a lot of seaplanes, and they fly very low.
Are you in the airline?
No, my last house I was. This one, it's like I opened the door, and we've had. I think there's been 3.
That's the third one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the span of 5 minutes.
In my house, all the airlines fly overhead.
Right. So my house, when I used my last house, we used to be right below. It was like every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yes, burnout is a big problem. I monitor all my supervisees and my students pretty closely for burnout because it's not easily detected, and students and supervisees rarely bring it up. It's usually something that I have to say, I think you're burning out. And they will be like, well, what do you mean? And I'll tell them the symptoms, and they'll be like, really? The symptoms that I see and that are in the research are, one, lack of compassion. So if you're a therapist and you're having a hard time being empathetic and having compassion for your clients, and you'll hear therapists talk this way sometimes. They'll just be like, oh, this client, wah, 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 whatever they do. And it's like, oh, okay. I'm guessing you didn't enter the field with that attitude. So you're burning out and you're overwhelmed and you don't have time for yourself. Because it's a known thing that as you start to become overwhelmed, one of the first things that goes is your ability to have compassion for other people, which makes total sense. Yeah. You're too much trying to protect the self to care about other people. The other thing that I see in burning out students and novice therapists is everything is a chore. So they'll have a paper to write, or they'll need to file a certain form or something with the state, and they'll just be like, oh, I just can't do it,
Yeah.
And it's such a simple task, One of the things that I often see in recent grads that I'm supervising is that they hate dealing with taxes, because taxes can feel overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
I have a very itchy nose. I feel like there's probably a cat hair, and now I'm on video, like picking my nose. This is gross. So they will avoid doing their taxes, and the whole time I'm saying, you can't avoid, there's 2 things you can't avoid in life.
That's a whole.
One is death, and the other one's taxes.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of a catch-22 because in order for them to deal with their taxes, they can't be a novice therapist anymore anyway. The other is lack of energy. Yeah. People will feel like they never get enough sleep, or they're just like, they're desperately looking forward to some distant future day when they finally get to relax and not have any errands to run. The other is bad sleep, and the other is poor work. So with my students, they'll turn in bad work. And this is the burnout that I look for. And with my supervisees and my students, I really try to help them out. And the thing that almost always fixes it, what do you think always fixes it, Bob?
Taking a break?
Right. Taking a break.
Yeah.
Vacation.
Oh, vacations, those are good.
Yeah. How long was it after you graduated 22 years ago? Did you take a vacation, like a good week or two off?
Oh, the first vacation I ever took, I was 38.
So this is 10 years into your career.
39.
Okay. 11 or something.
Uh-huh.
A decade into your career as a therapist was your first vacation. Yeah. So that's very common to therapists. It is because a number of things, private practice people in particular, because we tend to be givers. We tend to be martyrs, self-sacrificers. We tend to be go-getters, ambitious. We tend to be, and then when we go into private practice, we're self-employed, baby. We don't get paid vacation. We don't get sick days. And there's lean times where a few clients terminate and your practice is slimming out. Like in 2008, when the economy crashed, like all of our practices suffered. I thought I was going to have to move back in with my parents.
Oh, really?
And I was 37 at the time.
Wow. I got busier then.
Oh, really?
I
got super busy like 6 months after the thing.
No kidding.
But like while in late 2008.
Right. During the thing.
And then it snowed big that winter. Remember that big snow just after Christmas?
Yeah, I do. Now I remember. Yeah.
And no one could drive in Seattle.
And car racing.
And that bus like almost went off the edge, like in Superman.
Yeah.
It was like teetering on the edge.
Yeah.
None of my clients could make it to my house. So, and I couldn't charge them. And I had so few other, anyway.
Yeah.
So there's lean years, and you remember those lean years, and you think, if I take a vacation, what if my clients terminate with me? What if...
That's what I always thought.
Right. They'll suddenly learn that I'm a fraud and they don't really need me. And you have all these thoughts going around your mind that are to some extent slightly rational in the first couple of years of your private practice, because money is an issue.
Sure.
And the longevity of your business is kind of teetering like the bus off of I-5.
Yeah.
And so once you get established, you're still in that mindset. I think another mindset is like when you're an intern, when you're still in graduate school, you're treated like crap. You're treated like, okay, fine, we'll give you clients if you're good to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And instead of like, thank you so much for giving us free labor. In fact, I'm pretty sure you're paying money to your university to help our clients, which makes our business profitable. I, as a staff therapist, wouldn't have my job, or I would be paid half as much if you didn't work here for free.
Yeah.
That's not the attitude they have.
No.
They have much attitude of like, you're a peon. We'll give you clients. So you're begging for clients. You're begging for hours, and so all this sets up this mentality of, I just don't take vacations. When do I have time to take a vacation?
Yeah, that was me.
And so when you don't do that, and you're working with very difficult populations, and in the beginning of one's career, that's often the case because you don't really have a choice of who you work with. So you're hearing all this trauma, and the clients aren't improving very quickly, and you're overworked, and you're worried about even making money in this. You're very stressed out. You're going into debt more, and then I say, and you're getting burnt out. Then I say, you need a vacation. And they'll be like, ha ha ha, very good one. And I'll be like, no, I'm serious.
Yeah.
You're one, most importantly, you could, as this person, have a psychotic break, which is rare, but can happen.
Sure.
Or which is more common to see is like crying yourself to sleep in a fetal position every night.
Yeah. Or irritability and jadedness.
Right.
Ugh.
Having drinking more.
Yeah.
Smoking pot more.
Yeah, right.
Your marriage starts to tank. Your sexual libido starts to tank.
Right.
All these symptoms. So one, you need a vacation to save you and your marriage and your life and all that kind of stuff. But two, your clients are not benefiting from you being this way because you're losing compassion for everybody. You're losing the ability to think straight with everybody.
Yeah.
So on some level, ethically speaking, you have to take a vacation.
Yeah.
So the other thing here is...
Got to go to Maui, doctor's orders.
Right. Or just the staycation, honestly.
Yeah.
And universally it works. Every time one of my supervisees does this, they come back and they be like, man,
Yeah.
that felt good.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
I have a completely different attitude now. I'm back ready to go.
When I was 39, I took my first vacation, which was, like I took breaks from work, like a week off here or there, but to go visit my family in the East Coast. And those are different from vacations.
Right.
So Colleen
Depending on your families, I guess, right?
Yeah, right. And I love my family, and it's
Yeah.
fine. But anyways, Colleen's like, no, we're going on vacation, and we're going to take 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm not going to have a practice if I take 2 weeks. She's like, well, I'm going on vacation, and you're coming with, and we're taking 2 weeks. The second week, I was like, oh, that's why people do this.
Because it takes a week to settle into it.
Yeah, now if I take a vacation, it's not 2 weeks. I'm like, what's the point?
Yeah.
That second week is just really great.
Where'd you go on that first vacation?
We went to South Carolina to visit her best friend. And she's like, it was okay. I'm like, that's one of the best vacations I've ever taken.
Low
And,
pressure.
yeah. And, her friend was fun and her friend's boyfriend was fun. And we just kind of hung out and it was just great. We just hung out together. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was just, whatever. Yeah. But it was fabulous.
So institutions need to pay more attention. I think you were asking about this. Oh, what can individuals and institutions do to decrease the toll on students' well-being? Well, institutions, they need to pay more attention, which I don't know if they always do.
I don't think they're gonna.
Yeah. They also need to monitor each student, supervisors in particular.
They're not going to do that either.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're confirming my pessimism about institutions and people, but
Well, it's the path of least resistance.
yeah.
It's easier to do nothing.
And there's this work ethic that I think is great in some situations and bad in others. And one of the things that I see among supervisors is you got to work hard. You got to show that you can produce. You got to buck up, camper, and there's this attitude of like, I have to stay on top of my therapists who are under me to keep them producing, to keep them doing their paperwork,
Yeah, I remember.
When I've never met a therapist who wasn't personally motivated to get all those things done anyway, that they are perfectionists on the scale of things, therapists in general. Anyway, I've just never felt as a supervisor I had to rail on people. People are, by the time you enter the field of psychotherapy, you've come to reckon with the idea that you have to work for things. Anyway.
Do you remember the pace back then? Like
What?
when you were working in an agency?
Yeah.
Ooh-ah.
Well, I never had the pace that you did. Like you had like 30 some clients a week, right?
Yeah.
At community psychiatric clinic.
Yes.
30,
32, 35, somewhere
Yeah.
in there.
My agency was way more relaxed.
Oh, good.
Mine was like 20 or something.
Yeah.
But I would hear about all the other agencies. My agency was newer and run by people who didn't know what they were doing. And as a consequence, they took it easy on everyone because it looked ridiculous. Your agency had been around longer and had been more familiar with the Medicaid,
Right.
high production, high money kind of scenario. Push the therapist hard.
Yeah,
and my agency was never like that.
Was that Federal Way? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back then, I worked full time at the agency.
Yeah.
I taught at Antioch. I had a private practice. I was working for Mary.
And you worked for Mary, right?
So I was working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what that felt like, but not necessarily my agency.
God, can you imagine doing that now?
No.
How many hours a week were you working? Like 60, 70, 80, somewhere in there?
60, 70, yeah. Maybe probably more like 60, 65.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
For someone that doesn't really like doing that kind of thing. In fact, one of the reasons why I entered graduate school is because I hated the grind of jobs.
Right.
But I think a part of it that kept me going was I loved the work, and it was interesting to me.
Right. You chose well.
Yeah. And I knew it was temporary. I was trying to pay off my school debt.
Yeah. You get out of debt. You were very successful at that.
I did. Well,
5 years?
I think 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah. I paid off $80,000 in debt in 2 years.
Yeah.
Because for like the second year, I think I made something like $80,000 or something, and 50 of those thousands went to my debt. I remember thinking, I'm now paying more money to my debt than I'm spending. Like, that's something to say.
Something. Especially here.
Well, one, I'm making a lot of money, which feels good.
Yeah.
Relative to what I was making in other industries. I guess. And two, what was number two? Number one, and two, I'm living like a college student on $25,000 a year.
Yeah.
You know, that includes rent, food, and car, and you know.
I love that apartment you were in. That was so fun.
Yeah. That was a fun apartment. The weird thing about that apartment, two weird things. One, the landlords so it was a chiropractor.
Right.
Yeah, right next door.
Did they live next door?
They lived downstairs. So they owned the whole building,
right.
And it was a small building. And so it was a chiropractor office right next door. I had the sort of main corner apartment. They lived downstairs. So they controlled the thermostat for the entire building. It was a really old building, and there was one thermostat, and it was in their apartment. And so there would be times where my apartment in the winter time would be like 105 degrees. I'd walk home, and because there's a radiator, and it would just be like, and I'd just open the windows in the middle of the winter because it was so hot. The other weird thing was he wouldn't let me shower. So it was a bathtub.
Oh, that's right. I remember.
Yeah. And so for the few years I lived there, I took a bath.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah.
And I had super long hair.
You had long hair back then.
And a lot of it.
Yeah, you did.
Like, my hair went down to my butt, and it was like, have you seen Moana? Like the cartoon?
Yeah.
My hair looked like it's like, I have Japanese American hair, which is very big and wavy, and stuff gets stuck in it. And I would have to dunk my head backwards, anyway.
Yeah. I took a bath in that tub.
You did. Also, as institutions, we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about burnout more to raise awareness.
I totally agree. And I see for institutions very little incentive other than a moral obligation, but I don't think that moves people who are overworked.
Yeah.
That sounds really cynical, doesn't it?
No, to reflect this, a student actually came to me last quarter and said that he was burning out. And he was like, he really sheepish about it. He was just like, I feel like I'm going crazy. My supervisor is abusive, which she kind of is. Yeah. Or she really is, but just on, anyway. And I'm overworked. I haven't had a vacation in a long time. I just need a break. Is it okay? I've been thinking about taking next week off from my internship and from school. And I was like, yeah, dude, do it. Good for you. I mean, when people ask me to do that, I'm like, good for you. Because if you're asking me, you need it.
You probably waited too long.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right. If you're asking me, you should have asked me if I should chastise you for not asking me 3 months ago.
Right.
And he and a bunch of other students were astonished at how readily I was to agree to it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think one thing is I come across as this really tough guy instructor that likes to fail people. I don't like to fail people, but I have no problem failing people. Let's just put it that way. Especially if I told you exactly what you needed to do to pass the class and you didn't do it. But they were so astonished. And I was like, why are you surprised? I mean, I'm glad. Did I say something that made you think that you wouldn't get this approved? And the students are saying, well, other instructors don't necessarily have this attitude.
No, they have that 2 miss rule, right? Or the 1 miss rule or whatever.
Yeah. It's kind of varies. I mean, the 2 is the university standard, but instructors have different approaches. But he was like, yeah, I went to my past instructor and asked her like specifically the same thing. And she said, no, absolutely not. And I was like, oh, that's awful. Yeah. The last thing is therapy. You know, I feel like you should be in therapy if you're burning out. Early work in this field absolutely requires you to be in weekly therapy.
And then support your buds, your friends, your partner, your family, whoever.
Yeah. How do you let off steam? I mean, the other thing is aside, I guess if vacations are a bit of a luxury, how do you just really let off steam and turn off all the cell phone stuff? Like you take a Saturday and you just like, okay, I'm not going to think about work. I'm not going to think about errands. Things are going to fall to the wayside. That's fine. But I just need, and you just do what you like to do, whether it's hiking or playing video games or going on a bender. You just do, you know what you need. You also ask anonymous patron, what types of students are vulnerable? And I gave it some thought. Can you think of any of the types of students that would be vulnerable to burnout?
Probably anxious people, unself-confident people, I should think would be perhaps vulnerable because they'd work harder. Did I say unself-confident?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I think you did.
Huh?
I think you did.
Oh.
I'm not so confident in that statement.
I can't stand behind that. We'll have to rewind the tape.
Yeah.
Depressed people, probably.
Yeah.
Going to have a harder time. I don't know. Who do you think?
Well, the thing that popped into my mind that I see often is perfectionistic people.
Yeah.
There's various different kinds of perfectionism, but there's one kind where there's this worry about not being good enough for other people. And it's a perfectionism that is pretty destructive. And for those people, if they're privileged enough, smart enough or something, up until being a therapy student, they will have managed it well enough. You know, you're a perfectionistic young woman in the 11th grade in high school. Well, high school's not that hard. So, you kiss ass to all your teachers, you study on Sunday night for the test, and you do well in high school. And you're like, okay, I'm good enough. Everything's okay. College the same way. 4-year college is most of the time pretty similar. You work hard, you follow the instructions, you memorize the book, and you'll get good grades. Then you become a counseling or a therapy student, and all bets are off. There's no way to gauge if you're doing okay. In fact, at our university, we don't even give grades.
There's no grades.
You can fail the class, which is a grade. But aside from that, you're just told general feedback. Yeah. And people naturally, for whatever reason, feel terrible about themselves anyway as therapy students. They're just like, I'm a fraud. I don't know what I'm doing. How am I ever going to do this? Which is 99% of the time inaccurate. And so they're already starting at a deficit, and they rely on their perfectionistic mantra, which is like, okay, hit the books hard, study hard, ask the teacher a lot of questions, and I'll eventually feel like I'm in the perfect zone, because perfectionists need to be perfect. Yeah. They can't just be in the ambiguity of like, well, I think I'm doing well. They need to know they're doing well. And immediately I see these students crumble, and will sometimes tell me how much they're crumbling. They'll just be like, I'm really stressed out. I can't sleep at night. I know you keep telling me that everything's okay and I'll figure this out, but I just feel like I'm never going to know this stuff. And I don't really understand the material very well. And what I tell them is, it took me 20 years to understand the material. So you're not going to understand the material. And the first 10 clients you have, you might fuck them up.
Yeah.
And they might not want to see you anymore.
Yeah.
Because you're so nervous, or you're too focused on trying to be a quote unquote good therapist. Right. You're not really listening. And that's life. That's what's going to happen. So
developmentally appropriate and tragic all at once.
Yeah. Being a therapist is a lifelong journey of education, experience, and wisdom.
When did you think you got good?
Well, that's an interesting question.
I mean, I know it's because it's a moving target, but...
Well, if I understand your question right, I think I got good about 6 months after I graduated, in terms of me walking away from a shift and saying, I think I kind of nailed it with a few clients today. Prior to that, I would convince myself that I was trying and that I was doing some good, because clients would come back and I felt like I was doing some good. But I remember at the end of my internship saying, really just trying to think back to the clients, because I could, back then you could remember all your clients like very well, right?
Of course.
I was like, okay, running through my head, I was like, I don't think I helped any one of those people. Like, there's no evidence that I really helped any of those people. So, but 6 months after I graduated, I wasn't like, yeah, I'm awesome. It wasn't until 7 years later that I could really say, I think I've finally reached a point where I know that I'm going to be a good therapist today. I'm fast enough on my toes. I have enough repertoire. I'm relaxed enough. I have enough sort of automatic conceptualization in my head. I can pay attention enough to the relationship. I don't have to remind myself with because I used to have all these Post-it notes in my office, little quips like listen, or, get out of your ego or something, and felt like I didn't need those anymore. But I'm still getting better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you? When did you get good?
Probably about 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, you must be working on a different metric than I was asking the question.
Maybe. I don't know. I have a problem. You know me, I have a confidence problem in general. So, but I guess I sort of think, I read somewhere, I remember telling you this way back when, that the first 5 years after graduate school, therapists are pretty much just trying to learn technique. And so I think it's the nuts and bolts of how to sit with the client, and not necessarily, and how to do, I'm not saying how they learn how to do a particular kind of therapy like CBT or whatever, but like the, I don't know, the generic stuff that goes with being, whatever. And you spend 5 years doing that. I think getting competent has been like this sort of dawning for me.
Yeah. Well, tell me if this is accurate for you. You were influenced and trained by particular sorts of strains of therapy in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And had particular kinds of clients, I guess, in the beginning.
Yeah.
And went down some very fruitful paths that were sound.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't until recently that you started going down conceptual paths and personal paths with regards to your clients that had to do with attachment.
Yes. That's the last 7 years, but really the last 2.
Yeah. And then you felt like, oh, wow, now I'm really doing the good work.
Yeah.
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 Because for me, the first theory I loved was object relations.
Oh, me too.
But I went down the attachment object relations kind of road.
That's a good road.
And in family therapy, maybe there's more talk about attachment and much less talk about CBT.
I remember seeing these brochures for these trainings about attachment, and I'm like, that's just the latest fad, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Which is kind of funny now, because I'm like, well, what is a person? Like, what actually is a person? It's like, well, if you're not thinking about this, you're probably missing the boat on something so fundamental.
Because you were more sort of CBT oriented 10 years ago, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a good direction.
Yeah, it's fine.
But it's just
Depending.
just not the full repertoire and not necessarily getting to the root of the issue for many of the clients that we work with. I mean, some people come in with a classic CBT issue, but a lot of our clients are coming in for not classic CBT issues.
Yeah, if you have a CBT issue, like say phobia, I mean, that's the easy one, right? I mean, the most simple, that's the easiest one for me to think of off the top of my head. That's a very simple thing. You're probably not going to be doing attachment-oriented therapy for a person who's got, fear of flying. I've never had a client that had fear of flying, but I had a client once who hit someone with their car. Like they're in Capitol Hill, they're driving down the street, and it's late at night, and somebody walked out in the street, and it wasn't that they were crossing against the light, and this person hit them with the car. And she saw me for 5 sessions, and we just did straight CBT, prolonged exposure. We went to it was kind of cool because my office was 4 blocks away from wherever the accident was. So we just went there, and she told the story of the thing, and then we drove around the neighborhood in her car. And
You ran over someone to
expose
her to...
I dodged the car so that I used myself. And then we drove to the police station because the sight of cop cars was scaring the hell out of her, And straightforward. And after the 5th session, she actually didn't reschedule and didn't respond to any of my follow-up, and because she was done.
Yeah. That's 1 out of 2,000 clients you've had.
Yeah. Simple, straightforward, and it's cool.
Yeah.
Actually, it's pretty rewarding.
Yeah.
If you can help somebody with a thing like that and see their progress over, 5-6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So all this is reminding me of something that I want to talk about, but we need to take a break.
That thing, huh? Okay.
So we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, do so now. Some of the best episodes we've had with Bob have been patron-only episodes. So if you're not a patron, do so. If you are at a certain tier, you get certain kind of swag, like a mug or a pin or stickers or a card. Or at a higher level, you actually get 1 hour of consultation with me or Bob or Umberto or whoever is associated with the podcast. And someone actually is at the most deserving listener and is going to use that free hour of consultation with you.
We did it.
We did it.
Friday.
Okay. Well, don't talk about the content, but how did it go?
It was really cool. I really enjoyed talking to that person. She's fabulous. Really fun.
That's great.
Yeah. Fun. I mean, fun's like, she's talking about something serious, but
yeah,
I enjoyed talking to her, and lovely.
Yeah. So become a patron, become a most deserving patron, and you too can make Bob's day. So the thing I want to talk about is this would have been 10 years ago or so, maybe 15 years ago. You wanted to make a instructional video of prolonged.
I was thinking of something else.
What do you think?
This is fun too.
What do you think I was going to talk about?
That time I came to your class and we were talking about OCD.
Oh yeah. No. So this would have been 10 or 15 years ago. You were living in Ballard, and you were very much interested in prolonged exposure therapy, and you wanted me to help you make an instructional video about prolonged exposure.
That's right.
What were you going to use the video for?
I don't know. Like, I was teaching prolonged exposure to my clients, and I thought, great way to teach is to do, right? So we make a video of my exposure to my fear of heights and watch the progression and sort of take people through, this is what you do, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And this is what you can reasonably expect. And, I didn't really have any plans outside of, this would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had very little in the way of gear.
That's right.
To record you, but I had enough.
Yeah.
And we set out to do it, and we were spending a lot of time together at the time anyway. So it was just kind of like, let's just do this.
Yeah.
And I remember we got like 3% into this project before I think both of us realized how much work it was going to be. And it just ended there. But the one thing that we did was you took my mini disc recorder. There was a very short window where just before MP3 players came out. So it was, everyone was trying to miniaturize their music machines.
I remember those.
And prior to this, you either had a cassette or you had a CD, and that's one album. And then the technology around DVDs and CDs was getting better, and so Sony made this thing called a mini disc, which was a much smaller CD essentially that you could read and write on both sides, and it was in a floppy disk case, so you would never scratch the surface.
Right.
And it was this tiny little player, and I loved this thing. And for probably like 2 years, I spent like all this time like transferring my records to mini disc, my CDs to mini disc. This is during the Napster days. I was getting Napster to mini disc. And I remember walking around Seattle with that mini disc player and thinking, I have like 30 albums in this tiny little thing. And then like 2 years later or something was the iPod thing. And then it was just like all bets are off. But so I gave you my mini disc recorder, and I had a little microphone, and you went on top of your roof.
Yeah.
While I recorded you.
Oh, I remember that day.
With video.
Yeah.
From the ground.
Right.
I did not know prolonged exposure lasted for like 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But I remember sitting there recording you with my hand, just being like, oh my God, this is so tiring.
Yeah.
And then when I got so I had to sync the audio with the video.
Right.
And I just remember, I can't remember what went wrong, but the whole thing kind of fell apart. I just remember like I didn't set it up right, or the audio wasn't very good because you were in the wind, or
it was in the wind.
Something about that. But yeah, so it's just funny to think back, because it relates to the first conversation around you and I being in a podcast together. That was kind of like an early version of a podcast in a sense, because it was a media presentation of therapy. You were thinking of giving it to your clients, but if YouTube was around at the time or podcasting was around at the time, you might have been thinking. So isn't that interesting that you had a mind for video audio production around clinical issues way before I ever did?
Yeah. You remember we went to the Aurora Bridge?
No.
Oh, you don't remember? Because you remember that film you made?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Well, we went to the Aurora Bridge. This was a few months before. No, it was a few months after. You made that film. And I had been sitting on my roof for 10 days, every day for about 40 minutes a day, rain or shine. It was January.
Did you have a pretty bad fear of heights?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, there's people with worse, but yeah, fear of heights, yeah.
Okay.
So I was sitting there. And then we went to the Aurora Bridge, which was about 120 feet, I think, maybe or so, give or take, from the ground to the top of the bridge.
Yeah, people kill themselves off this bridge.
Oh, yeah. And we were there for 5 minutes, which was weird, because when we did that film that you made before, we were there an hour, and I was freaking out the whole time. We stood there for 5 minutes, and the buses are going by, and the rumbles, and the wind, and the whole thing, and I'm like, it's not high enough. So then me and you and Todd hiked up to Rattlesnake Ledge.
Oh yeah, but I don't remember that being part of your prolonged exposure.
That's why we went that day.
Oh
yeah, and sat there. I still have that. Todd snapped a photo of me. I don't know from where, but I'm sitting like 3 feet from the edge.
Yeah,
of Rattlesnake Ledge.
Oh, I do remember that.
Yeah,
I think you had the recorder then too.
Yeah,
I think you were like talking into the recorder.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, my distress level, I'm about a 5.
Yeah.
Okay, let me move forward a little. Maybe I even did edit that thing, but I don't think I have it. That'd be funny to get.
That'd be fun. Yeah. Anyways, took about 10 days to get the fear from freaking out, and then to like Rattlesnake Ledge is a 1,000-foot cliff.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty hairy.
It's hairy. Yeah, I was probably 35 out of 100 in terms of how tense I was.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyways, how do we get on this? Oh, you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah,
because we were doing pre-podcasting. Right. Hey, they still call them podcasts.
Yeah.
Nobody has a pod anymore, right? An iPod or whatever?
Not technically.
Yeah.
But yeah. And from rumor, Apple has tried to trademark the word podcast unsuccessfully.
Yeah.
The cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
It's now just a word in the English language.
Like trademarking finger.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, so you mentioned that I made this film, and I feel like I have to give a minute on that.
The film.
So I got a video camera in 2002, and I had my dad's video camera growing up that I used it a lot. And I would make these little home videos, I'd mess around in college sometimes making little documents of whatnot. And I always liked that kind of creation.
Yeah.
And then I got this mini cassette, I think it was called.
The little, yeah.
They called it digital video. It was DV.
That's right. That's right.
It was like it was the first mini cassette. And so it was when video cameras became small for the first time.
Still tape though, right?
Still tape, yeah. And I got, software. In fact, I still use the software. So I bought Sony Vegas software to edit the videos back in 2002. And I don't know why I bought that. And I think it was even owned by someone else back then. But anyway, I got used to the format. And to this day, almost 20 years later, I'm still using Sony Vegas, which is weird because most people, I don't even think Sony owns Vegas anymore. Anyway, it's just for you video nerds, production nerds, you'll get a kick because most people use Final Cut Pro, and there's a few like standard ones that everyone uses, and it's like, why would you use a Sony Vegas? It's so weird, But I'm just used to all the buttons anyway. So I was making little home videos and editing these little things together, and I thought, what if I actually went into film? And this is when streaming video on the internet became popular, but it was barely out. And I remember watching what people were making, even though it was bad, but I was just like so excited because
for you in the Real Networks days?
Yeah. So real videos or whatever, but it was in that days when YouTube didn't exist, or didn't really exist. And you were like, oh my God, I can watch videos on my computer.
Weird.
And to young people out there, they might be like, that was a thing, but that was a huge deal because when you could make your own home movie before this, what do you do with it? You'd have to get a studio to distribute it to the masses.
Right.
Or you'd have to play it at home for your 3 friends to come to your living room.
Yeah.
So there was no way to share something with anyone beyond really just, your family.
Right.
And all of a sudden, here's this thing where you can post something on the internet, the entire world can see this. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I had a lot of free time at the time. And so I had this video camera. And so I was like, I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to make something. I'm going to try to make the best 10-minute short I can make, technically speaking. But I'm not going to really share it with anyone, but this will be like my rough draft for like, maybe I'll go into this later. And I didn't have a script. Yeah. I just had like a rough idea of what the story was going to be, but that wasn't very important to me. It was more important that I could just create a visual audio experience.
Yeah.
Because the other thing was, when people shoot, they have a boom microphone, and I didn't have any of that stuff. So I had to do everything in post. I had to do all the audio in post. Right. And so there are a lot of voiceovers and I did a lot of sound effect stuff with my mini disc where I recorded traffic and birds, and I did the whole thing. The story was ridiculous. It was about a rape, actually.
That's right. Oh my God, I forgot.
Beth.
I was the guy too.
You were the guy, but just the feet, right? Well, I don't remember how you played into it, but Beth, so I just got my friends to be the characters, and the story about it was this, if I remember right, this girl gets out of the car, and she is going on a date, I think, and she sees something that reminds her of this rape that happened to her. And then we do a flashback to this rape that she had gone through. But your character had anxiety about something, crossing roads or something.
Was this a different story?
I don't know. Anyway, the point is that it had some points to the short film, but but the script, I didn't write a script. It was more like, I'm going to shoot a bunch of footage and then I'm going to piece it together. I don't really care if it's coherent, but I just want to see if I can technically make a production. And I did. And then I remember showing it to you guys like at a party. I was like, okay, let's watch her. And everyone was kind of like, huh. Because to me, it was, again, more about the production.
Sure.
And to everyone else, it's more about story. Because that's why you watch things, is the story.
Right.
You know, no one after was like, oh, I like what you did with the sound. Because that's really why I was doing it. It's like, I wonder if I can do sound production.
Right.
Because I'd been a musician, but...
Yeah.
But anyway, it was so much work, and it was such kind of a disaster in terms of crowd appeal that I never did it again. And it was 6 years later when or 5 years later when I started the podcast. So there's sort of a theme there. Anyway, so getting back to vulnerable types of students, you talked about anxious, depressed, perfectionistic. Also, people who have a lot of responsibilities and no support.
Oh, yeah.
So they have kids, pets, mortgages,
right,
and they don't have any support. So they're much more likely to get burnt out. And I've seen a lot of that.
Sure. A lot of Antioch people have jobs, right?
Yeah. I've just seen a lot of students who are what I call pathologically independent. They're used to being depended on.
Yeah.
They're used to being the strong one. And that's kind of a profile that's attracted to being a therapist. And then they become a graduate student, and for the first time in their life, they're really, really faced with their own dependency needs, and really, really faced with their own vulnerabilities and their own capacity for hard work and emotional drain. And they're not used to asking for help. Now, not every counseling student is like this, but many are. And so that's another profile of someone that's vulnerable to burnout. Another one is just the more trauma you've been through.
Yeah, right.
You're absolutely going to be more prone to burnout because of vicariously being triggered by your clients, but also just your own capacity for emotional outlay. Also, people who don't talk about their vulnerabilities very much. You know, I've had hundreds of supervisees and students, and I can immediately profile students now and supervisees. Like, oh, you're like this past student, because there's certain categories, you know, they don't fit it exactly, but there's certain things where, oh, you're going to be one of those people. And not in a bad way, but I'm just like, okay, I think I've figured you out on some level. And one of the profiles is someone who just is not comfortable asking for help. And they're not comfortable saying, I think I've had enough. And they're not comfortable saying, I don't really know what to do with this client. I have some supervisees who, when we have meetings, they sit down on my couch and they're like, they just rattle off a bunch of stuff that they're doing, and there's nothing in there that's like, and this is what I need help with. It's more of like, let me just report to you what I've been doing lately. And there's no implication like I'm here to get help, or I'm struggling, or I need your support or validation. It's just like, I'm going to report to you that I'm doing a good job, and you will give me a stamp of approval, and I'll be able to leave. You know,
they want the stamp.
Yeah. Well, they want to. Well, I think some of them are literally just trying to get their supervision requirements met. You know what I mean? And they don't really want supervision. And that is the sort of person, because, you know, Bob, you are perhaps in the top 0.1% experienced able therapists in Seattle, and you'll call me sometimes for consultation. Yeah. You'll just be like, dude, I need to consult about something. Yeah. There's some kind of wonky's happening right now, and I just want to run something by you. Right. So that's normal. We are all like that. Like, oh, that was interesting. I should run that by somebody. Or I wonder what so-and-so would do with this. And to be a novice therapist and to have nothing, again, it's not that they are waking up in the morning and saying like, I'm awesome. It's more like they've always woke up in the morning saying, I can't really depend on other people for help, or it's too vulnerable to ask for help, or I need to depend on myself. I need to figure this out on my own. No one wants to be bothered with my problems or whatever. There's a lot of different paths to it, but the result is that they are very alone and feel like they have to do everything by themselves, and they just don't have that impulse. And so those people, I think, are more prone to burnout as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
God, I've had a lot of good supervisors. Some not so great ones, but
How many supervisors roughly have you had in your career? Because I've had 17. Because I had a bunch from my doctorate,
oh, sure. I didn't have 17. Let's see. Somewhere between 10 and 15.
Okay.
Somewhere in there.
And on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being like a mentor, someone that is still in your head, that you always felt safe with, that taught you things, that was a guide to being a therapist and a human being.
Yeah.
And 1 being abusive, like someone that you have trauma from.
Yeah.
And 3 being totally mediocre, like they're not abusive, but they never really helped me.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt sort of distant. I don't know what's going on. The relationship was... So how many of them were at a 5 out of your, say, 10 to 15?
2.
That's me too.
Yeah.
2 people, number 5. And I've had 17. How many of them were in the 2, 3 to 4 range?
Most.
Yeah, like...
I haven't had anybody. I had 1 that I would consider abusive.
Okay, so you have 1,
Yeah.
2 5s.
2 5s.
And like 12 mediocre, varying degrees of mediocrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, me too.
Yeah.
But you said I've had a lot of good ones. You said didn't you just say that? I've had a lot of
good ones. I guess I should say I've been very grateful to the 2 that I've had because they've helped me a lot. I guess that feels like a lot of good ones.
Because I was worried, because sometimes I worry, like, is there something about me that has had so many mediocre supervisors and some abusive? Because I found it to be true with other people as well. Not everyone for sure. But, so, your experience with mediocre supervision has validated my life.
Yeah. I've had supervisors that I thought taught me well, but who I found to be abusive, and shaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like I'm kind of weird because I actually learned a lot that I think was really I couldn't have learned. I didn't have another forum at the time for which to learn it. Who knows if I would have sought it? But the actual experience of working with them sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 2 that I can think of were warm, safe, funny, nice, wise. 1 particularly was very wise. The other one I wouldn't call wise as much as just like smart, I guess.
Yeah.
I looked forward to talking with them.
Yeah.
They're still in my head.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I remember just learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so what do you think about this? Like, one of them was a big part of me learning about trauma. Learning about how to treat trauma is something that you cannot learn from a class, I don't think. I think you can begin the learning process in a class. But trauma is so complex, and the treatment of it is so complex that, and dissociation is so complex, and PTSD is so complex, that I had to have someone to problem solve with, like, so this happened, and is because the worry is like you can hurt people with trauma treatment. Yeah. And so you can't just go on a hunch. You have to go forth with confidence that that you're least likely to harm this person. And he provided like a good portion of my learning in that I spout on the podcast often.
Nice.
Anyway, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology of Seattle.
First video.
Thanks for joining me, Bob. Yeah, how do you feel about doing your first video? How do you feel about your shirt choice?
Oh, not so great about the shirt choice. It's a nice shirt, but I'll dress next time. Video was good.
Where is Seabrook, Washington?
Down there, Pacific Beach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that does it for that episode out there. Please take care of yourself because why, Bob?
You deserve it.
Yeah, you do.